Hey everybody, Alex from SCADA Forge here. In this video we are going to talk about alarms and the alarm components in the Vision module. For alarms we have two modes of alarms. We have like the real-time or current alarms. We also have alarm history. The first thing we're going to do before we set up alarms and all of that is we're going to set up an alarm journal which keeps track of the history of all of our alarms. To do that, we're going to go to our Gateway webpage, log in, go to Services, under Alarming, and select Journals. Then we're going to hit Create Alarm Journal. You can select if you want to store that in an external database, if you want to store it internally with the Ignition database, or if you want to send it to a remote gateway. Since we already have a database set up, we're just going to select Database here. We'll give it a name. We'll leave the description alone. We'll set it to enabled because we want it to be enabled. Query only will allow us to only read data from that. We want to be able to write data, so we will leave that unchecked. And we will select our data source, which is our database that we have configured on the gateway. Then we can set a minimum priority. In this case, we'll use low because we just want alarms to be tracked. We won't set up any diagnostic alarms for this. We'll just use low, medium, high, and critical. So we'll set that to low. We won't deal with stored or enabled or disabled events for shelved events or enabled or disabled events here. We'll talk about shelving, but we'll just leave that as is. And then we'll leave everything else as default. You can do filtering by alarm source. So if you wanted to have multiple alarm journals, so you wanted to store alarms just for a particular production line, you can do some filtering here, and then you can filter on display paths or sources. And then you can also enable data pruning. So if you want to delete your alarm history out after some period of time, automatically that will take care of that. And under advanced, you can define the table information here. We'll just leave it by default to call it alarm events and alarm events data. And we'll use store and forward since that's enabled by default. That will allow Ignition to save any alarms in case the database connection goes down and rewrite them to the database when the connection comes back up. So we'll hit Create Alarm Journal. And we see that it is created here, and we're showing it under the Alarm Journals tab. So we will utilize that, and we will go back to our designer here. And let's first set up a couple of alarms. Under Ignition 102, I have an alarms folder here. I have an analog alarm tag and a discrete alarm tag. Let's first add a discrete alarm. So I'm going to double click on the tag to open the edit pane. You can also right click and go to edit tags. I'm going to select alarms here on the properties list. This allows us to add new alarms to this tag. So I'm going to add a new alarm. You can either double click there to add one or use the plus button. And that will populate the properties for this alarm on our gateway. So I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it discrete alarm active. We'll give it low priority. That's fine. Typically, I like to make the name and the label the same. Then you can use that in the alarm components to give it a more descriptive name than what the tag name is, with the tag path and all of that. I also typically would make the display path the same depending on what we're looking at. Acknowledgement mode we'll leave as manual, requiring the operator to acknowledge it even once the alarm condition clears. And we won't require any acknowledgement notes. And since this is a discrete or Boolean value, which is on or off, we'll set this to alarm when it is a value of 1 by choosing equal here and putting in 1. And we'll leave our deadband and notification and everything alone for now. We'll cover a notification in a future video. So I hit OK. And then we'll see on that tag we have the alarm bell icon, which indicates there's alarms configured on that tag. And if we go back into here and we'll give this a value of false, so we can see that that is false. And then we'll go through and trigger some alarms after we build a screen to look at them. And we'll see what's going on there. Next, let's go to analog alarm. This is just a memory integer tag. We'll give it a value of 0. And then we will click the alarm section here. Let's create a new alarm. Let's call this analog. Let's do high alarm, since we have a value of 0 right now. Let's make this a high priority alarm. We'll give it the same label and display path. And let's say we want this to be equal. We want this to be above the set point, and we'll use a set point of 90. Inclusive, that will say if it's 90 or above. If we were to choose false, that means anything above 90. And then any change, we'll look at any change available, and we'll leave the deadband and everything alone. And now let's do a high alarm. Analog high alarm. Let's give this a critical priority, and we will copy our label here. And again, if you're using UDTs or things, you can parameterize all of the values in here to pull in the tag name, display paths, etc. into the labels and things. Leave everything else as default, and we will set above set point of 95, and we'll leave that to inclusive. And we will hit OK. And we'll see that now we have alarms configured on this tag as well. This doesn't give you any information on how many alarms are configured. If we were to expand this, we can look at the alarms folder here underneath the tag to see what alarms we have set up. And then we'll talk about alarm metrics in a future video. That's something that's newly exposed in Ignition 8.3, but basically this gives you some metrics you can look at for currently active alarms on this tag, what type of priority those are that are active, how many of that are acknowledged or unacknowledged or cleared, what the highest priority is for these different categories, when the last active alarm came in, if we have anything shelved, and so on. So now we want to be able to see the alarms that we're looking at. So let's go to our alarms folder under 102. We'll create a new window. We'll call it alarms. Now we'll go over to the component palette and we'll just search for alarm. You'll see that we have two alarming components. We have an alarm status table that handles any of our real-time alarms. So anything that's currently active as an alarm, whether it's acknowledged or not, and if it's been cleared but not acknowledged, will show up there. And then the alarm journal table will show us our alarm history. So we'll click and drag the alarm status table over, and we'll just make that as big as the window here. And you'll currently see that we have nothing showing in here because we don't have any active alarms. We'll expand our tag browser here. And if we look at this, we can go to Customizers, Alarm Row Styles. Here we can set different styles for the priorities. And if it's cleared and unacknowledged, cleared and acknowledged, and so on. We can also go to the properties down here, set our sort order, refresh rate, if we want to sort oldest alarms first or bring in the newest alarms first. If we want to allow multiple selections, so the operator can select multiple alarms at a time. If we want touchscreen mode, marquee mode, I believe that cycles through different alarms and scrolls in case we have a lot of alarms showing up there. We can set an alarm journal name here if we want to tie this to an alarm journal specifically. And then we can deal with shelving times and things available to us if we're shelving alarms. And then we have some various options down here for appearance. We'll just leave all that by default. If you want to get in and customize all of that, you can take a look at the docs and figure out, what everything looks like there. And then we can also put some filters on here. So we can put a minimum priority like we did on the alarm journal. We can show active and unacknowledged, active and acknowledged, or cleared and unacknowledged, or cleared and acknowledged. Typically, we would set things up this way so that if an alarm comes in and it's not acknowledged, we'll see it as active and unacknowledged or cleared and unacknowledged. And then if it's still active after it's been acknowledged, we would show that with active and act. But once the alarm has been acknowledged and has cleared its alarm state, we generally want that to fall off by leaving show clear and act checked. Source filter, display path filter, and provider filter will allow us to filter down to this alarm status what shows here. For this case, we'll just leave those empty for now. That's really useful if you're building templates and say we have a handful of alarms on a pop-up that has a template on it, and we show the alarm status there. We can filter that down to show only the relevant alarms for that piece of equipment using these values here. And then source and display path deal with the tags and the display path values, and then provider would allow us to filter alarms to a specific alarm provider rather than the entire gateway if we had multiple alarm providers or multiple tag providers set up. So we will now trigger our discrete alarm by setting that value to a 1. And we'll see that we have an alarm pop up here on the screen. So this gives us the active time, the display path, the current state, which is active and unacknowledged, the priority, an event ID, and a label. If we want to acknowledge that we're in play mode currently, we can click that alarm in the tree here, and that will bring up our acknowledge and shelve buttons for that alarm in particular. So if we want to acknowledge that, we can hit acknowledge, and now it moves to active and acknowledged, but it's still in alarm condition because this value is still a 1. So it's still showing up here on the screen. So let's clear that alarm condition. And now it will fall off because we are not showing cleared and acknowledged alarms. And then if we were to trigger that alarm again, it will pop back up. Now this is the default setup for the columns that we have up here. If we're in play mode and we right click on the columns, we get a number of different fields that we can show up here. So if we want to look at acknowledgement notes, act time, if it's in a pipeline, sending out alarm notifications, when it was active and cleared, specifically whether it's active, act, or cleared, if there's any notes or who acknowledged it, the priority. If we want to show the source path, we could select source path, and that will give us a column here with the tag path of that alarm. We'll right click, we'll clear that. We'll also clear event ID. That's generally not super useful to operators. And then we'll have the label. Since the label and the display path for this example are the same, we'll just take display path off. And we can also click and drag these columns around. So let's say we want the label first, so we know when the alarm came in, what it is and its current state. And then if we were to save this, that will save those settings. But that's really the only way to go in and edit that easily, is to do that in play mode. And then you can resize columns. So if we had, some of our labels were really long, and say priority is going to be pretty short, we can make that smaller and maybe make current state a little smaller. So that shows us how the alarm component works. So let's go back and acknowledge this alarm. Now let's take our analog alarm. We set an alarm high value of 90. So if we make this 90, because it was inclusive, we'll see that we have the high alarm comes in. And now let's say we're trending poorly, and we now have a analog high alarm. Because the high alarm came in and we're still above that set point of 90, this alarm is still in an active condition. And the high alarm is also now in an active condition. So we see both of those, and we see that we have different priorities here. Since we have multiple alarms, we can also use the checkbox up in the header if we want to select everything in the list and acknowledge that. And we can get into alarm management till the cows come home. In this case, where we have a high alarm and a high alarm, you may want to enable or disable the alarm condition so that you're only showing one alarm if you're in a particular condition. Like if we were to automatically jump to high, it could clutter the operator by seeing both alarms show up here. So you may run into conditions where you want to get a little more granular with enabling and disabling alarms. So now if we reset this to 0 and uncheck this, we'll go back to no alarms. And you can also, inspect certain alarms. Let's click that back on. So if we were to select that and click inspect, it'll give us details on the alarm there. We can hide that. You could pull up trends if you want to look at trends for that, along with some history. We didn't set up history on that tag, so we'll just leave that. And then if we click shelved, we won't see anything right now, but we could, shelve that alarm, say for 5 minutes. What this will do is if we click this, now we're shelved for 5 minutes, and we see that alarm is shelved, and when it expires, no matter what we do here, we're not going to see the alarm come across because it's shelved. So that's useful for if you have some piece of equipment down and it's going to be triggering alarms left and right all day long. You can shelve an alarm for some amount of time to basically ignore that. So if the operators are still running a facility, they're not going to be inundated with lots of alarms. And then you can go to the shelved tab here, select what you want, and you can unshelve. That will cancel our shelve operation. And then we'll see that we do have all of those alarm conditions that came in while it was shelved. So we can just acknowledge those and they will go away. Now let's take a look at the alarm journal. So we will just create a new window called alarm history. Now we're open there. We'll go out of play back to design mode. And now we can bring the alarm journal table over. So this will give us data on all of the alarm events that we had here. Again, this will give you a number of properties on the component. We can filter start and end dates. So if we want to put a date time selector on here to pick, say we want to look at, March 4th, we can select that so we can go back in history without having to scroll. We'll get information on what alarms are selected in there, various appearance settings, and then we can again filter to show or hide different things on here. So maybe we wanted to show, only tags with a certain priority, or alarms with a certain priority. We can select that here. So if we were to say, oh, I only want to look at high or critical, we can change that, and that will filter it down accordingly. And again, we can go into play mode, right click on the header, and we can make this look similar to what we saw on the alarm status screen. And this will give us information on what the time was when we saw that alarm come in, what the event state was, so when it was acknowledged, when it became active, or when it cleared, the priority of that alarm, who acknowledged it, and what the value was when the alarm came or went into the mode. We won't see an event value for acknowledged, but that's not the end of the world. Commonly, we'll just show this as an example. I'm going to go to design mode. I will copy paste this. We'll go back to our alarm screen and paste our alarm journal here. And commonly what you'll see if you look at actual screens is you may have a, we'll just put a checkbox. Oops, view, reset panels. We'll put a checkbox here, and we'll put that in the middle, and we'll say show history. Make that a little bigger and recenter. Now we can go to our alarm journal. We can set its visible property to look at the checkbox selected property. And we can hit that. Then we can go to our alarm status, and we can go to do expression, and we can say not checkbox selected. So what this will do is, using this checkbox, it'll either show us the alarm status, or if we check that, it'll give us the alarm history. So this gives you a way to view alarm current status and history without having to do two screens. And that's a very common use case in the industry. We can also look, if we say we're to select an alarm in the alarm journal, we can get some detailed information about it. We can view details like we did on the alarm status page, and we can apply filters if we want to do some searching for a particular piece of equipment or something. And one item to note on the alarm journal component is, if we have only one alarm journal on our system, which we do, we don't need to specify a journal name property here. But if we do have multiple alarm journals, we would specify what alarm journal we want to show using this property here. But since we only have one, we don't need to worry about that right now. So I should give you a pretty good overview of everything you need to know about alarms in Ignition and managing alarm status and alarm history in Vision. Thank you for watching.